Welcome to Not Another PD, the podcast for helping professionals who are over dull trainings and death by slideshow workshops. I'm Jasmine Purcell, social worker, coach, supervisor, and self-proclaimed boundaries queen. Each week, you'll hear real, honest conversations, sometimes solo, sometimes with expert guests. Think insider perspectives, practical takeaways, and a focus on your well-being, not just how you show up for clients. This podcast is about you, the human behind the caseload, the human behind the profession. So, what are we waiting for? Let's get started. Episode 13. Welcome back. This will be another solo episode today. We've had quite a few amazing guest episodes. So the next 2 episodes are going to be solo episodes, and we're going to be focusing on, in the next 2 episodes, bold boundaries for leaders. Quite a lot of you who listen are also leaders yourselves. So you're people managers, supervisors, coaches. So you actually lead other helping professionals and also your clients to outcomes, to growth. And boundaries for leaders is equally important, if not more important, than the boundaries for practitioners, because when you're a leader, or staff and even your clients, they look to you to role model what healthy boundaries look like. And if you don't have boundaries yourself, or you have inconsistent boundaries, then that's what you're role modeling to your staff. This is so incredibly important that we have this conversation. So if you are a fellow leader, then please stay with me for this episode. And some of what we're going to be talking about it may be difficult, because as leaders, it can be hard for us to be in a vulnerable space when we actually acknowledge that there's still work that we can do with our boundaries. It can make us feel vulnerable because we're people that others look up to. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with being vulnerable, and we all have different areas that we still need to work on, absolutely myself included as well. Being vulnerable and being able to acknowledge where our boundaries may be lacking, that's really the first step to us doing something about it. So that's why I'm talking about this topic with all of you. So bear with me. I know it's a really hard and uncomfortable topic and conversation, but hopefully you'll get something helpful out of it that you can then implement into your leadership role. So thank you so much for joining me in the first part of my Bold Boundaries Leadership series. Hopefully, if you like this series, we can have more episodes like this as well. But this is just the first one to see how it lands with you all. So I wanted to firstly start with a story of a leader that I had been supervised by previously, who I think embodied everything that I want to be in a leader, but I know a lot of you also would want to possess some of these skills in this leader. So this leader, and we'll call this leader Francine. I don't know why I chose the name Francine. It's the first one that came to mind. Not exactly a common name. Francine is also a mother like me, so I always found that there was something safe about having a leader who was also a parent. And for me, that created almost that collegial experience, or that shared part of our identity, that we both were parents. So Francine was also a parent, and she was someone that was incredibly busy. She was in a very, very senior role, had a lot of staff under her, and so many competing demands for her time constantly. And a few things that I really admired about Francine is that despite the fact that she was so incredibly busy, she was always really warm, down to earth. Even when she was frazzled, she always gave her staff time. So I really acknowledge that about Francine. Taking school holidays off is often so incredibly important when you have school-age children. So Francine would, not every school holidays, but where she could, she would take school holidays off. She would also take her children to various appointments that they had. And Francine is someone who prioritised being a parent and not just a leader. So she really embodied the work-life balance that I promote to anyone who will listen now that I'm a leader. But what Francine would often talk about is what she enjoyed doing outside of work. So she enjoyed different health and wellbeing activities, yoga and swimming and all sorts of other activities. So Francine would often speak about these activities of enjoyment that she did after she finished work. Francine is someone who had amazing boundaries around her start and finishing time. If she needed to leave a little bit earlier to take one of her sons to an appointment, for example, then she wouldn't hesitate to tell her staff that, where she was going, that she had an appointment for her son, so she wouldn't be available. There were always plans in place of who the team could go to if they needed to. She always ensured there was someone else they could go to, or that if something was very urgent, they could still reach her via phone. But she was amazing with her boundaries. And she was able to balance her professional role as a leader and then her personal role as a mum. And I always thought if I could embody any of those qualities that Francine had as a leader, I'd be kind of on my way to actually having a work-life balance and having those bold boundaries that all leaders should have. And if you can resonate with some of Francine's story, if you've known a leader like Francine or you are a leader like Francine, then you're incredibly lucky, and also your staff are incredibly lucky to have a leader like you who's actually role modeling those bold boundaries. There are three main leadership traps that I myself as a leader, but also I've seen other leaders fall into, and I've witnessed it myself as well. Number one is the fixer. So if you're a leader, or if you know a leader whose default response is fixing everything, so fixing other people's problems, if they have new staff, instead of spending the time to train up the staff, they would tend to, fix anything that's going wrong. They may not focus so much on upskilling their staff, but just fixing anything that they notice is a problem. They may be supervising a placement student, and the placement student may be struggling in some way, or perhaps their written communication skills are not up to scratch. So instead of taking the time to upskill them, to capacity build their staff or their student or even their fellow leaders sometimes, then they will just do it for them. They'll fix everything. They're a fixer. The second one is the always on. So this leader does not have an off switch ever. So they'd be the type to have non-existent boundaries around start time, finishing times. You may have never had a lunch break, or if you know a leader like this, you may never see them taking a lunch break. They would tend to eat at their desk, eat on the run. It may get to 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and then you may hear them say, or this may be you may hear them say, "Oh, I haven't had lunch yet. Oh, doesn't matter, I'll eat when I get home." Or perhaps there's someone who always arrives at work frazzled and without lunch, without snacks. There's someone who is actually so frazzled from most likely working late the night before that they didn't have enough of a chance to prepare food to bring to the workday and plan some snacks and meals during the workday. They're people who essentially what they're role modeling to their staff is that you don't really have a life outside of work, or you don't need a life outside of work, that you are the work, you are the job, you live and breathe the job. And I've seen my fair share of leaders like that. It can be quite difficult because these leaders, not only do they not take leave themselves, but they can put barriers up if their staff need to take leave, because it's not common for them to take leave. They'd be the type to arrive at work when they're clearly medically unwell and should actually be at home resting. There's just no off switch for these types of leaders. The third and final type is the overcommitter. So these leaders struggle with the boundary of actually saying no. They will overcommit to things. If there's any kind of new project, they will agree to it and perhaps reflect later that they're already overcommitted with their existing workload. And these overcommitters can also struggle to say no to their staff as well. They often have amazing ideas around different professional learning they can run, different workshops that they themselves or their team can run, and they say yes first and think and reflect on it later. So whether either you yourself are a fixer, an always on, or an overcommitter, all these leaders have one thing in common, and that is a challenge with boundaries. So implementing boundaries in the first place, well, firstly, recognizing that boundaries are imperative, they're so important. The second thing is actually then, once they're aware of the importance of boundaries, actually implementing boundaries and then sticking to the boundaries. These three types of leaders struggle with boundaries, full stop. And it becomes a challenge, as I mentioned at the start, when they're role modeling these lack of boundaries to their staff, to their students on placement, that they're supervising, that they're mentoring. They're also role modeling this to their fellow leaders. So if they're a really experienced leader, there'll be others in the leadership team who are not as experienced, who look to the leaders around them for guidance, for role modeling, and then what kind of message are they sending? So that's really important to think about. And I bring these three types of leadership traps that we can fall into to your attention, not to kind of berate anybody if you're being guilty of these things, because I myself have been guilty of these things and I've witnessed them time and time again myself. It's really just to kind of raise our level of awareness of these traps that we can fall into, because boundaries are so incredibly important, and boundaries should be really your number one preventative strategy to try and prevent burnout from entering your life. Because when you do reach burnout, it doesn't just impact your professional life, it impacts all areas of your life, which includes your personal life and your overall well-being. That's why I'm having this really direct conversation on the podcast with all of you leaders out there, because we are those that others really, really look up to and even perhaps aspire to be like in some way. And so what are we, I guess, role modeling to them? And if we actually reflect on any of these traps that we fall into, would we want the next generation of professional that we're mentoring, that we're training, that we're supervising, that we're leading to not have any boundaries just because we don't? And that's something that I think about a lot. That's why I have developed my signature boundaries pyramid, and there's episodes on each of those three areas, and they are survive, sustain, and thrive. And I may actually do another episode on applying my signature boundaries pyramid to leaders specifically, actually. If you'd like me to record that episode, let me know, send me a DM and I will record that one as well. Don't be disheartened. If you're a leader or you know a leader that falls into some of these traps, well, the fact that you're listening to this podcast, and you can also share this podcast episode with some other leaders or even emerging leaders out there, and the more we have these conversations, the more aware we become of some of these traps, and we can then actually do something about it. So it's amazing that you've privileged this time to yourself as a leader or an emerging leader to actually hear some of this content, because it is super important. And I always encourage you to kind of reflect at the end of every episode, but think about, what is the cost? So what is the cost for you as a leader of not having boundaries? Whether you are the fixer, the always on, or the overcommitter, or a little bit of all of them, what is the cost for you? What's it costing you? I would love to hear from you whether this has been helpful to you, and if you can identify with any or all of those leadership traps, then let me know. And stay tuned for next week's episode. So episode 14 will also be focusing on leaders as part of my Bold Boundaries leadership series. I can't wait to see you there. Thanks so much. Thank you so much for listening to Not Another PD. If today's episode resonated with you, share it with a colleague who could use stronger boundaries, less burnout, and more balance. And don't forget to subscribe. Until next time, keep saying yes less.